Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, sir?
Doing well, and good to be back in the saddle here and ready to go. I'd like to talk a little bit about Korea. It's back in the news, or it stays in the news. This time, it's a little bit discouraging. In recent weeks, we were actually looking towards some positive things coming out of the Olympics. Looks like we're not going to get much of a peace dividend out of this, but the North Koreans are sort of sticking to their guns and have cleaned up their act a little bit because they went there and they suspended the testing of their nuclear weapons or their missiles. We don't know about the nuclear weapons, but they are sticking with that and still want to have talks. But it looks like our side's doing a little bit differently because immediately now Trump has announced accelerated, much more serious, many more sanctions, 27 countries involved. And that's hardly the way to have a breakthrough with somebody. I mean, he isn't treated like some of our other presidents have treated some pretty tough leaders, whether it was with Reagan or Kennedy or Eisenhower. They at least, talked to people a little bit more, and that's how we gradually, ended that Cold War. But we now are seeing tremendous effort on this on the sanctions. But the one thing that caught me on this story was that they really want to have tough law enforcement. So we got to stop anybody moving in there with a ship and trading. So they don't want to look too aggressive. So they're just sending these less aggressive Coast Guard cutters to stop and check and find things. I think, oh yeah, the Coast Guard's supposed to guard our coast. And we're supposed to guard our property, our coastline. But here we are over there with the Coast Guard, enforcing laws over there. It makes no sense. It would make more sense to have the Coast Guard a little bit closer to home. But this might be a reflection of what some of these people think, that their responsibility is worldwide, that we're the policemen of the world, and it's no different to them, whether we're dealing with the coastlines of North Korea or the coastlines of South Carolina. For them, it's all the same.
Yeah. The Americans in the media love to laugh at North Korea, this goofy president, goofy country, backward people. But what's interesting about the whole Olympics chapter is that they came off looking very good propaganda-wise. They unrolled the charm offensive, which irritated everyone here. They came off looking very good, and the U.S. came off looking very buffoonish. From Mike Pence, vice president, refusing to cheer any other team, refusing to look back at Kim Jong-un's sister and the whole thing, and now ending it up with new sanctions. The U.S. comes across as just kind of a ham-fisted tyrant, and North Korea comes off looking better.
And it looks like they're pretty serious about, increasing the sanctions and the protectionism, and they're not backing off. And Trump said he was a protectionist, and he is. But he had a real hawkish protectionist in the campaign and in the early days of the administration. But he was sort of pushed aside. But notice that he was just brought back in. Peter Navarro, he's back in the fold on advising, on these trade policies. So it's a serious move. It's a continuation of it, and they always do it in the name of national security. If you say it's national security, you can do anything you want. Nobody dare talk about it. So this is for national security purposes. Some of the big sanctions now are to protect steel, and we've been through the protectionism of steel for years and years. And they do this with never a thought that there could possibly be a retaliation or a possible injury to American consumer. They don't believe that for a minute. They just see, they're very narrow. They have these blinders on. Oh, you put on sanctions, we put them out of business, and the Americans will produce the same steel for the same price, which is completely wrong, because we're probably importing something like steel because we get a better deal, which helps them and helps us. But they don't see it that way.
I remember back when you were in office, I had some local companies come and visit with me on this trade issue because they deal with downstream steel products, the things that aren't made in the U.S. So, but Trump called these the heaviest sanctions yet. That's the quote that he used. And what the whole thing is that other companies, other ships were violating the sanctions by trading with North Korea. North Korea needs to have some fuel. They need to have coal. They've got cold winters. People freeze to death. So companies are jumping up, actually engaging in market activity.
Right.
And the U.S. wants to put the kibosh on that. So what it did, as you pointed out, it sanctioned 20-some companies and countries, targets China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan-based companies, because these ships flagged from those countries are in the high seas doing some trading with North Korea, selling them some fuel, some coal. So the question is, how far will the U.S. go? They're trying to rattle the sabers and say, we're going to start boarding ships. But do you really think the U.S. is going to start boarding the Chinese vessels out there?
There's no way, and they're not going to go into the China Sea where these free lanes are transporting trillions of dollars worth of trade. But it's a lot of noise. But sometimes that gets out of control, and they will put on sanctions. He's already done that, and they don't know exactly when the other countries, whether it's China or Russia, will get pretty annoyed with all this. But this affects all countries. Any country that dare sell anything to North Korea, it affects them too. So it's not going to help our standing in the world. I think our credibility continues to go down, and this certainly will be the case. And Mnuchin has been more or less out front on this, Secretary of Treasury. I guess he's the economist that's dealing with that. It just really surprises me that some of these people come out for protectionism, because there was a time 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was all economists, conservatives and liberals, said, protectionism isn't good. But now all of a sudden we have these people in high places that argue the case. But I want to read this quote from Mnuchin about exactly how he sees this. He says, while we appreciate the fact that there haven't been any tests by the North Koreans, they haven't retested, that's not exactly a terrific standard of what we're applying. That's what they said. Stop the testing, we'll talk to you. But we wouldn't stop our military exercises.
Yeah.
So, and then Mnuchin went on further to say, whether they're Russian ships, this is just terrible, whether they're Russian ships, whether they're Chinese ships, we don't care whose ships they are. If we have intelligence that these people are doing things, we will put sanctions on them. If they're doing things, we got to put on sanctions for them. And yet we're now scheduled to have a big military exercise over there, and then we will throw out where we're willing to talk to them, but so far only on our terms. And it looks like the North Koreans caved in a bit by doing no testing. So our government is not going to seriously talk with them. South Korea wants to. South Korea is in a box here because they're going to be forced to participate in those in military exercises. So that is a shame. But our government, though, has assured us they want to look at at what they're doing and making sure it's legal. And if it's legal, then we can. They weren't sure they could do such and such, but we want it to be legal, which means get it rubber stamped by the United Nations, because we can, pressure them and bribe them and say, look, you're going to do this, and then it becomes legal. That's their idea of legality.
And this returns to kind of one of the themes of our program for quite a while, at least, is the U.S.'s bluster around the world and how it essentially is ignored by the rest of the world. And I think this is bluster. It's bluster on the part of Mnuchin, saying we don't care if they're Chinese or Russian. If they're doing something out there, we're going to get them. That's not going to happen. President Trump said if the sanctions don't work, we're going to have to go to phase 2. Phase 2 may be a very rough thing, may be very unfortunate for the world, is the quote that he used. Obviously, he's talking about a military attack. That attack will, result in probably hundreds of thousands dead, but nobody believes he's going to do it. It's the bluster of this sort of very aggressive foreign policy that has no follow-up.
Yeah, they never weigh the conditions, how it might hurt us. They only see how we're going to punish them, and all of a sudden it's going to be okay. But there's a cost in this. There's a military cost in it, sending those ships over there. There's a cost in our reputation around the world. There's a cost in that maybe the Coast Guard cutters might serve a benefit. Here we spent the money, we have them. This would be a good place to keep them close to our coastline. But no, they're sending them over to Korea to do this, which just seems so outrageous. But the the whole idea of protectionism is something that has. Like I said, I thought at one time they've sort of dispelled that. People know there's retaliation, there's trade wars, and of course even the founders talked about this, and they said that the more you trade with people, the less likely you're going to fight with them, and if you have trade wars, you're more likely, to get into a war, and it won't be I can't believe that North Korea is going to do anything to precipitate the war, but if something happens where the Chinese get further involved, something could happen there. But I don't know if anything good can come from this. I think everything bad, not only economically, but geopolitically, is going to be a negative. And sometimes when we have these conditions, it takes a long time, the conditions of protectionism and war, to work that out. And we were there, but now the whole effort is to move back, and it's so superficial. And there's a lot of people who support, tariffs because they think, on the narrow sense, that will benefit American people, and yet there's no evidence for this. The big problem is that if you look at the day after the sanctions are put on, or a short period, maybe that will increase production in the United States. But eventually, if we can't compete, it's not going to work because they'll either sneak something in or it's going to hurt, and most of the time it leads to more unemployment rather than higher employment. So people ought to just decide freedom is a good idea. And the other reason why I like free trade is I see people as with individual sovereignty. You work hard, you should keep what you earn, it's your money, the IRS shouldn't take it from you, and you ought to be able to spend it the way you want. And if you decide that there's a foreign car that has a better price and a better car, why shouldn't you have the civil liberty of spending that money there? Maybe that'll put an incentive to somebody here in this country to build a better car. If you protect a weaker economy, it's sort of like the bailouts. You're protecting the weak companies. This will not improve things, and that's one reason why the market works so much better than government management.
And certainly government imposed sanctions on countries to try to get them to change their behavior, which never works. But, I'd say in closing, the propaganda machine is gearing up again. People are going to repeat the propaganda. Even people that are our allies in many ways, demonizing North Korea. We know that it's a messed up place. So there are a lot of messed up places in the world. But it's all about beating the war drums. It's all about getting phase 2. And even people that say, hey, I don't want war, but I'm going to still join the propaganda, you're really contributing to an atmosphere that it will enable an attack if that comes.
Well, I can't help but say that I'm disappointed that something better might have come out of the Olympics. I'm always optimistic that if you get together and young people play sports, that can neutralize things. And I think it did. I don't think it was really a downside in going to the Olympics. I think the downside, of course, is our foreign policy. And it's not to say that the North Koreans have some idealistic foreign policy, but they're realists too, because they know that they are very, very weak. Then all they have is the bluster and the pretense that they might be able to defend their country if we attack them. But this whole idea that we're doing this because we fear that the North Koreans are going to invade. They don't say who. Are they going to invade the United States? Obviously not. Invade our colony, South Korea. They're going to invade them? I don't think so. I think they have enough brains to realize. And are they going to drop a nuclear weapon on somebody and initiate it? There's no way. North Korea could be wiped off the map with our nuclear power within an hour or two. This whole thing is all built up for antagonism, to look bluster, appease some of the American people who like a tough standing and who have been misled into believing that protectionism is a good way to protect jobs in the American economy. I think that's completely wrong. I think freedom works, and we should understand that freedom is an efficient way of providing goods and services. We need to understand that and have a little bit more confidence that we don't need the bureaucrats and the pundits and the authoritarians to dictate to us. It's not going to work. A little more freedom would go a long way. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.